So originally I made a video on creating the poll routes, but then halfway through I realized it didn't make a lot of sense without doing users first. So we're gonna do that right now. So with users, we're gonna need authentication and authorization, as well as encrypting passwords. And first, I need to get rid of all the changes that I made. Luckily, we're using Git, so we could just look in our logs and go back to the last commit that was working. So let's do that right now. Git reset dash dash hard. So we're doing a hard reset. Usually you don't want to do this, but sometimes your code gets so messed up that this is your only option. And doing that should get rid of all the extra files that I created. Alright. And clear this. And also we need to start our Mongo server, so mongod. There we go. Everything's connected. Okay. And then let's open up our schema files. So the users as well as the polls. One thing I forgot to add was a created date. It's for bigger applications, it makes more sense to have a created. So created and type is date. And then default is going to be now. So date.now. If you don't add this, it doesn't really matter at the moment. But for larger applications, the created date will come. I gotta make sure there's a comma there. For larger applications, the created date will come in handy a lot, just to see how all your data is sorted out. And then also gonna add it to the poll schema. Actually, I'm gonna add it to the very bottom. So created type dates and defaults to date.now. Okay. With that out of the way, let's start on. Let's continue on the user schema. Ugh, man. Okay. So right now we're storing the passwords in plain text, which is bad. You should definitely encrypt your passwords, so that it's encrypted. So for that, we're gonna install a library to encrypt passwords called it's called bcrypt, and then we're gonna use the bcrypt.js version, just because the original version does have a lot of compile errors, but we're not gonna get into that. Did it work? Okay. Sorry, I just saw a lot of warnings, so I thought maybe something went wrong. Alright. And then we're going to add a couple of methods on top of, or into the user. So the first one, we're going to add a pre-save. So this will take effect before it saves. So then we could encrypt our password before saving it to the database. A word of warning, up until now I've been using arrow functions, but this is an edge case or a gotcha where you need to actually use the function keyword. Just because of how the arrow functions work, if you're attaching a function to an object, that this keyword won't properly bind unless you use the function keyword. Otherwise, you'll have global scope, and this will refer to your machine instead of the object. Okay, and with all async await functions, we need to put inside of a try catch block like this. And then if there's an error, we're going to send it to the next function like so. Now the logic, the main part of the logic will be inside of the try, and we're just going to do an if here. This dot is modified is password. Then we're going to return next. Because hash equals await bcrypt dot hash this dot password hash equals hash password, and then we're going to return next. Okay, so a quick explanation of what's happening here. So if this is modified, it's just saying that if we're sending in a different password, we're going to check if it's correct or not. And if it's not modified, so in the case where we're just querying the database and everything is coming out back normally, we don't have to do anything. We're just going to send it to the next function. Otherwise, we're going to hash the password using the bcrypt.hash. And this 10 is just the strength of how strong our hash is going to be. And then the hash will be stored into the actual schema object itself as the password. I believe that's it. And I think I forgot to import bcrypt. So bcrypt, we're going to require bcrypt.js. Okay. And then this is all well and nice, but we also need a way to check if the passwords are the same. So we're going to add another method. Methods. Oops. Dot compare password. And this is also going to be an async function. And we're going to take in the parameters of the attempted password as well as the next function. So like above, we're going to put the async into a try catch block. So that any errors that occurs, we're just going to send it to the error handler. And then in here, we actually need to check the password in the object, this password, and compare it to the actual attempt. So say that your attempt, or you're trying to log in, and your password is password. It's going to be different from what's being stored because what's being stored is encrypted. So the password in the database will look something like this, and that you'll never be able to guess that, and you're not supposed to. One second. bcrypt.compare, and then we're going to compare the attempted password to the password that's being stored. And this will return a boolean. I don't really like VS Code's grayed out unused methods, but we'll just go with it for now. So that is the basics of encrypting passwords. Now we actually have to create or be able to log in and register users. Otherwise, basically just creating users. Okay, so now we're gonna start making our register and login routes. So first, go into our entry point. We're gonna put all of our routes at this prefix, use at /API/auth. And then we're gonna send in all of the routes for this endpoint here. And we're gonna actually create, make sure I'm in the server. I am, okay. Let's clear this really quick. Make directory routes, touch routes index.js, and touch routes /auth.js. Okay. So our project structure is going to be like this. We're going to have our routes in this folder, and then our handlers in the handlers folder. And then we're going to put them together at the entry point index.js. So first we need to import all of the routes, and we're gonna require /routes, and the basic premise is that we're gonna do a routes.auth. So that'll take care of all the auth routes that will live here. Now, if you run your app now, it's gonna break because there's nothing inside of these two files, but we're gonna change that really quick. So in the index of our routes, we're gonna export everything. Oops. Module.exports .auth equals to require /auth. Oops. Auth. And that's all we have to do in the index file. Now in the auth routes is where we're going to have to add some heavy lifting. So we're going to be using the express router. So it'll look something like this. Const router equals require express that we installed earlier. And then we're going to call the method router and instantiate an object. And also make sure that to export it, exports equals router. And then the two routes that we're going to have is a post route at /register, and a post route at /login. And there's one last thing we have to add to this file before we're done with it. And that will to be importing the correct handlers. Require /handlers. So we have to import the correct handlers and add it to these routes, which they don't exist yet because we're going to make them right now. But so .. will go up one level to the root directory, and then it'll go back into the handlers directory. So now we need to make those handlers. So touch handlers auth.js, and then open those files. Also, we need to be able to export them in our index. It will be a module.exports. And since we're going with the convention that all of our handlers are accessible this way, we're actually gonna spread out every individual handler inside of auth. And that should do it. All right. So what do we need to export? We need a register function, which is going to be request, response, next. Oops. And we also need a login function. Also request, response, next. And we're using exports here instead of module.exports because in our index we're actually spreading it all out. So the auth will be exports, and the index will be module.exports. Just a small catch-all. That's all it is. And going back in here. So what do we need? Before we do anything, we need our database, which we access using our models folder. Whoops, not that folder. Models. So in register, since we're using our database, it'll be asynchronous. And a simple fix to do that is doing async await. Try. And you'll see this pattern a lot throughout this entire application. Every async function will need a try catch. This way you don't have to deal with promises or callbacks, and it makes things a lot easier to read and write. Make sure we pass our errors in, and then also login will we'll follow the same pattern. So try, catch, error, and we'll fill that out in a bit. But in register is what we need to do first. So we need to create users because currently our database has nothing in it. So let's make a user. db.user.create, and we're going to create based on the body of the request. And for now, let's just send it back to the user. This is going to include the password, so it's best not to use in production, but we'll fix that in a bit. We just need to see that it works. Clear, and then we're going to start the server to test it, nodemon. And assuming everything is connected correctly, we will do a request to register. And for those of you who don't know, this is Postman. It allows us to send other things besides GET requests. So, like a post. Because in the browser, it only could send GET requests in the browser. This way, you can send more than you can actually send data to it. So what I'm going to send is a username with my name and a password of password. And not found. Something is not connected. Oh, I know what it is. So the routes is not currently handling register. Save, and then nodemon will restart the server for us. Send, and there we go. That is the user that we created, and this is the hash password. And we have the ID and the created date. Okay. Now we actually have to sanitize this because we don't want to send the hash password to the user. And we also need to be able to log in. So let's actually just do handle login right now. So the routes have both handles, and we just need to finish off the handlers. So let's first sanitize it. So I'm gonna destructure the user, and then we're just gonna send back the ID, the username, and not the password, but that should do it. And then I'm actually gonna destructure it here, so we can just use object shorthand. So if we do another register, let's make a new user. I'm just gonna do username. This way we only get the ID and the username back, which is good. So login. For login, we actually have to check, or we have to find that user. So await db.user.find, and we can't use find by ID because the users won't know their own ID. So instead, we're gonna do a find one, and we're gonna actually find it where the username matches the one that's being provided in the body, like that. And then now we have to check if it's the correct user. So let's destructure the ID and username because we're gonna send that back. And the check will be a const. Let's go with valid. Await user.compare password. I believe that's correct. Request.body.password. And then if it's valid, we'll just do a res.json. ID and username. Yeah. And then if it's not, so else, we're gonna throw an error. Throw new error. Let's call it invalid username password. Okay. So let's test out this route. So login, and we're just gonna use the same one that we used earlier. So, boop, and it worked. And to test other users, still worked. Okay. So we're finally creating, and hold on, forgot to send the error. All right, so we're finally being able to create a login, but there's one problem. Using this method, we can't actually authenticate. Oh, that's fine. We can't actually authenticate quite yet because at the other routes, it'll be asking for the credentials, and we're not sending anything back. I think I'm gonna do that in the next video, but that's gonna be the next step. So what we're gonna do next is to add some sort of authentication credentials and then middleware so that other routes can check which user is being logged in. All right, see you guys next time. Clear. Let's actually commit before we leave. Git status, git add everything, git commit, added, login and register. And okay, see you guys soon.